Welcome to In the Funnel. My name is Mark Cox. In the Funnel is a group of sales coaches and consultants that help B2B sales teams dramatically improve revenue. Clients come to us when revenue growth has stagnated, or their sales team is not meeting expectations, or they need to recalibrate their sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. Our clients have enjoyed tremendous success working within the funnel, and please hear it straight from them by listening to the testimonial section of this website. What they'll tell you is there's two things that make us unique and different in our space. Number one, we have a process and a methodology. First, for understanding your current state, and then second, for building your sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. The second thing that makes us unique and different is that everybody within the funnel has run a material sales organization in their recent past. We're all practitioners. We don't have any theorists or teachers, and what that means is we can get in front of your sales team and run the next sales meeting, or join them on their next sales call to close your next large prospect. All of us have a passion for professional, disciplined, process-driven sales, and we'd be delighted to talk to you if you're looking to grow revenue for your company. Please feel free to reach out to us through this website at info@inthefunnel.com or by telephone. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.
So I want to talk about a very simple structure for people in the second half of their career, for people who are leading in a sales situation, is this. Notice whether you're listening for similarities and pattern matching, or are you listening to explore difference? When you listen for similarity, you say, tell me more. This is a north-south question on a listening compass. It's continuing in the same direction. It's handy, but tell me more will tend to confirm and reinforce the direction in where you're going. To build some additional muscles in the second half of your career, if you're leading a group, is use east-west questions that are listening for difference. And these questions are, and what else? This is a question that's going in a completely different direction from where they commence their conversation from. The other one is take me back to when you first started, when you first noticed, when you first got involved in this project. Again, this is creating a version of a story that will change your perception because it's not in the current pattern of similarity and the current direction of the dialogue.
Hey, Mark, how's it going today?
It's going pretty good, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. What is the podcast about today?
Oh, I'm sorry I missed that, David. Say again?
Well, I'm actually curious, Mark, if you know what the podcast is about today, because it looks like you could have some improvement.
Today's podcast is about listening, which is exactly what I wasn't doing to you there.
Yeah.
and we've got a great one today, David. You and I probably shouldn't try acting or doing skits at the beginning of these. I should only work with professionals for that. But today's podcast is with Oscar Trimboli. And he's an author, and he's host of the Apple Award-winning podcast, Deep Listening. And he's a really sought-after keynote speaker on this topic. And some of the folks who listen to our podcast, David, they'll remember we had Oscar on the show maybe a year and change ago, where we were reviewing his second book, which is called Deep Listening, Impact Beyond Words. I love the book. Today, we're talking about his third book, newest book, How to Listen, Discover the Hidden Key to Better Communication. And he's just got an amazing testimonial for this book on the cover by Michael Bungay-Stanier that we're all big fans of at The Selling Well. And his testimonial is, when Oscar Trimboli has something to say about listening, listen. He's the best in the world. So really fortunate to have Oscar chat with us again here today. There's so many things I took from reading his book in preparation for today, but I love the three numbers that really matter most: 125, 400, and 900. 125, the amount of words the average person can speak in a minute. 400, the number of words we can listen to or hear in a minute, the average person. And 900, the number of words we can think a minute. And reading the book, I'm going to ask him about it today, but what jumps out at me is, well, if somebody can only speak 125 words a minute, but they think at 900 words a minute, we only get 14% of what they're thinking based on what they say. So how can we be more effective with every key stakeholder in terms of listening to set the environment to pull the rest of that information out of them, whether it's a buyer, whether it's our teammate, whether it's our boss, whether it's our spouse, whether it's our direct report. Huge upside, I think, for both of us on this one, David.
Couldn't agree with you more, Mark. I just think that, in our day and age with the distractions that are happening, with assumptions that happen with our salespeople and with some of these meetings, I just can't imagine a skill that would be, that you could invest in that wouldn't pay dividends with the whole listening. And that's why I'm particularly excited about today. And I'm excited to hear what, the best in the world has to say on this topic. And I'm sure that you and I and everyone listening is going to get a tip or two that they could probably put in place right today.
I completely agree with you. Let's have at it. Hi, Oscar. Welcome to the show again.
G'day, great to be back. I'm looking forward to listening to David's questions today.
Well, as always these days, we are joined by David Fauser, and he's my sort of partner in crime on the podcast these days, because whenever we're talking about these core topics and in business or in sales, David is such a good sort of benchmark because he runs a sales organization of 140 people. So I always like to see how topics and ideas resonate with David. How are you today, David?
Great. You guys did a great job building up the pressure on me to ask great questions, and so we'll see. Hopefully, I don't let you down, Oscar.
Well, I think the interesting thing is going to be how we listen today, David. Not just the questions we ask, but how we listen. Mm-hmm. And those familiar with the podcast know I'm a massive fan of a book called Deep Listening: Impact Beyond Words by Oscar Trimboli. And Oscar was good enough to send me this book maybe a year ago. And I think I've passed it on to at least 10 or 15 different clients that we've been working with. And David, I'm not going to put any pressure on Oscar, but he did two things. He sent me a copy, an advanced copy of his fantastic new book, How to Listen: Discover the Hidden Key to Better Communication. And we're going to talk about that book today. And we're also going to ask Oscar why my testimonial for that book didn't make it into the book, because as you can imagine, it was genius. So we're not quite sure why it didn't make it, but I'll share one testimonial from somebody else we all admire. When Oscar Trimboli has something to say about listening, listen. He's the best in the world. That's from Michael Bungay Stanier, and he's the author of The Coaching Habit, another book we love on this show. So, Oscar, a long intro, but welcome again, and thank you for joining.
My pleasure, and thanks for supporting the work of listening in the workplace.
So Oscar, tell us a little bit about after starting so well with deep listening, what was the objective or what prompted you to write How to Listen, the newest book for 2022?
Deep Listening, book number 2 in the series. Book number 1, Breakthroughs: How to Confront Your Assumptions. And book 3 only came about because of listening. I got an email in July of 2020 from a reader saying, look, Oscar, the podcast is lovely. Your interviews, they're handy. But the topic you're talking about and the quest you're on for 100 million deep listeners in the world deserves a book of weight, of depth, of over 300 pages. So we can really go deeply on this. And it was an interesting challenge. The difference between hearing and listening is taking action. So it kind of got me thinking, and working with a Canadian publisher out of Vancouver, Page Two, they challenged me as well to go, look, this topic done well, listening in the workplace to this depth. There's not a lot out there, Oscar. I think you could make a good contribution here. So rather than starting to write a book, we started research. We started listening to our community of over 1,500 deep listening ambassadors, and then we listened to people we don't listen to. We did surveys, and then we started listening to technology that we don't listen to, Google search and Amazon search. And we kind of, if you think of those as three independent circles, we tried to form a Venn diagram and notice what was the intersection. And the intersection is the book, How to Listen.
And Page Two, that is Michael's publisher, isn't it? Isn't
Yes,
that the same publisher, right? And Andy Paul's most recent book came from that same publisher, actually.
Yeah, there's a great community of people trying to make a difference in workplaces there, and the author conversations are fascinating.
Well, I do like numbers. I think I'm a bit of a storyteller, but also into facts. We'll talk about that in a second. But I love numbers, and for me, the constant theme that always resonates, the easy thing for me to take away are the numbers 125, 400, and 900. Tell us about those three numbers, Oscar.
Yeah, those numbers are the essence of the book. They're the three numbers that resonate with the people who have already read the book, provided feedback on the book, written reviews on the book, used the book in their workplace. These three numbers represent speaking speed, 125 words per minute, listening speed, 400 words per minute, 900 words per minute, the speaker's thinking speed. These numbers matter independently. They matter more in their relationship with each other. Listening and speaking is a simultaneous equation. You change positions regularly during a dialogue, whether that's one-on-one or whether that's in group conversation, your role will move. And what you need to understand is that you will be distracted when you're listening, because you listen at 400 words per minute and they can only speak it at 125. So there's a 4-time differential between your listening speed and your speaking speed. That's why you're probably listening to this podcast at 1.5, maybe 1.75 speed. You may be even listening at 2 times speed. You can still have complete comprehension when it comes to listening. But because people speak much slower, you will get distracted as well. You'll drift, you'll anticipate, you'll problem solve. These are all the barriers that get in the way of listening. But of the numbers, the one that matters the most, the one that's going to make the biggest difference in your listening is 900 words per minute, is their average thinking speed in an English-speaking workplace. Now, if I'm thinking at 900 words per minute, but I can only speak at 125, you're roughly hearing 14% of what they think. Now, David, in a sales situation, 14% of what they think is the difference between winning a piece of business against the competition or not. 14% is a good situation where you might win. But the worst situation is if you win and you didn't hear what they really wanted. And when you've won, the client comes to you and says, no, what I meant was, and as a result, that sale's going to be more costly. That customer is going to be dissatisfied. The likelihood of referral is going to be low. The sales friction, the operational friction, and the cost of that sale is not going to be worth the effort. In fact, it may be negative. So my wish for everybody is knowing the 125-900 rule in the workplace means you're just going to ask one extra question. That's my wish for everybody.
As you know, when I'm hearing you, there's two sides to that sale, because there's the buyer and then there's a seller. So there's an 86% chance on both sides that you're both going to be disappointed. So it's actually a two-way street, which almost multiplies, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it gets worse if you're working with people who are in complex, collaborative, resource-constrained environments. The likelihood, the average is 900, but they could be thinking up to 1,600 words per minute in really complex, collaborative, creative environments. So those odds go from 14% to 5% if people are thinking out on the edge. So it gets worse if you're dealing with more senior people. It gets worse if you're dealing with more complex environments. It gets worse if there's significant politics that you're not discovering in the selling process because it's opaque to you. It gets worse in all kinds of ways. And that's why there's confusion, there's frustration in a lot of dialogue when you just don't pause for a little bit longer and hear those just another 125 words.
Well, Oscar, when we were exchanging maybe 6 months ago, a few emails about your book, when you'd been kind enough to send me the copy, he did a wonderful thing, David. He kept asking me, what am I learning from the book? What am I taking away and learning from the book? And then it caused me, because in the book, at the end of each chapter, there's some exercises, 3 or 4 exercise, points of activity to do. And one of the things I will say, Oscar, I've been very highly attuned to over the last few months waiting to speak to you today is how the listener really impacts the actual behavior of the speaker. Mm-hmm. And I have these examples of organizations I'll work with where we have an executive team that's functioning very, very well. And there's a calm confidence amongst the executive team. And you actually hear some pregnant pauses in a conversation, and you hear some silence. And then there's other executive teams where, regardless of who's speaking, there'll be 2 or 3 other people in the room who are just dying to jump in and say something. And you really get the impression they're not even hearing what the other individual says. Mm-hmm. And this might be a function of whether they're listening for differences or similarities. It might be a function that they haven't tuned themselves to listen properly for that meeting. I love that analogy in the book. But that's one of the things I took away, David. I'm not sure I'm always the best listener. And there's a great analogy in the book about how you prepare yourself for a conversation with someone. And the analogy is made to an orchestra at the beginning of a performance tuning.
Okay.
Taking a minute and just tuning to get all aligned and doing that yourself to get prepared to listen for a meeting that's coming up or for a conversation with someone. And boy, I've seen a difference, at least with me, on the impact of some of the people I'm speaking to. If I'm calm, then they can kind of calm down a little bit. And maybe they'll have a chance of getting a little bit more of what they want to say out. I also always love the tell me more.
It's a great question. Yeah, I find Mark, and I don't know what Oscar would say about this, but I'm curious. Like, it seems like the older that I'm getting and the more experienced I'm getting, then I seem to be shutting down a little bit more with the listening. It seems to be more of a challenge, because I remember earlier in my career, I would hang off the words of some of the senior sales guys around here and really learn. I was really open and I got so much out of our conversations, but it just, I don't know, it seems to be something I need to work at now. Is that something that's proven, Oscar? I'm just curious.
Yeah, we've got about 23,000 people in our research database, and we capture their age in decades. And despite the fact that as you get older, theoretically, people think your listening improves, what happens is you have a body of experience and you pattern match and you listen for similarities. You go, oh yeah, I had that before. A decade ago, we were working out in Winnipeg and we had that issue, and I'm just going to jump in and save them a whole bunch of time and allow my sage wisdom to wash over them. And what happens is you're not fully aware of the context and it's not identical. And you're like a quiz show contestant that presses the buzzer before the host has answered. And you're really fast, but you've answered the wrong question. The other flip side of that is you know the answer to the question, you hold back and you go, look, I know the answer to the question, so I'm not going to listen. I'm just going to let them carry on. And you're missing so much nuance in what they're saying. You're missing how they're saying it. So I want to talk about a very simple structure for people in the second half of their career, for people who are leading in a sales situation, is this. Notice whether you're listening for similarities and pattern matching, or are you listening to explore difference? When you listen for similarity, you say, tell me more. This is a north-south question on a listening compass. It's continuing in the same direction. It's handy, but tell me more will tend to confirm and reinforce the direction in where you're going. To build some additional muscles in the second half of your career, if you're leading a group, is use east-west questions, questions that are listening for difference. And these questions are, and what else? This is a question that's going in a completely different direction from where they commence their conversation from. The other one is, take me back to when you first started, when you first noticed, when you first got involved in this project. Again, this is creating a version of a story that will change your perception because it's not in the current pattern of similarity and the current direction of the dialogue. So back to your question, David. Yes. Without the consciousness to go, am I listening for similarity? North, south, continue in this direction for 4 kilometers, right? That's what the GPS would be saying. What you want to do is make a U-turn. It's, let's look east and west, let's look left and right. Let's go back a little bit further so we can understand the full context. Because my suspicion is, David, what you don't notice is, as a listener, by you being fully present in the dialogue, you will change the way the speaker expresses the idea. When you're in that place of judgment, anticipation, and problem solving, you're not changing anything. You're not changing your thinking. You're not changing their thinking. You're not creating value. And more importantly, you're not helping the client. I'm curious which bit of that lands for you, David.
Well, yeah, a lot of that lands for me because I think that sometimes I'm so speedy and trying to get through things. But I think what I really found interesting of what you said and what's on my mind as you were saying it is, as you become a better listener, do you become better at asking questions? I mean, because you're saying that you have these north, south, east, west, sort of a structure. Does it actually become easier? Because sometimes when I'm in these conversations, I'm not sure what the next question I should ask. I know good questions is where to go, but I'm not always too sure where to go,
Yeah, Mark's probably laughing because in the book we say lots of questions doesn't make you a good listener. The right questions make you a good listener, but it's not the only bit of listening that makes you good at what you do. This is often more powerful than a question. And this, what I'm about to share with you as a concept, is rarely used. This will help you if your pipeline's got a bit of a curve in the middle, it's like, I call it pipeline blockage, everything's stuck in the middle. It's like, it's not that we're losing, it's not that we're winning, but the opportunity is not progressing at the velocity or the speed at which we thought it would, right? So if your pipeline's kind of not a pipeline and it's got a lump in the middle, it's like a blocks pipe and you got to call the plumber, we're probably not listening either well to our sellers, to our clients, to our resellers, to our distributors, to our systems integrators, all the people that sit around it. And the technique that most people don't use is this one. And silent and listen, share the identical letters. And yet in that mad rush to fill in the gap, to solve, to progress the opportunity, to move on to the next one, we don't just stay in that space long enough. That space is as powerful, and I would contend more powerful in some instances than a question. Just the opportunity for that person to go, Now that I think about it a little longer, David, we haven't spoken of finance. Let me speak to finance first, then I'll come back to you. Oh, David, now that I think about it, we haven't even brought the engineering team on in this discovery process. Let me come back to you. Let's move on to the next one. And I'm curious, because most people aren't comfortable with silence. How are you with silence on a scale of 1 to 10, David?
Oh, geez. Well, I think a 1, because I think that I feel that, as a leader or as somebody that is sometimes looked upon for advice or something like that, I feel that I need to be right. It's that whole processing speed you spoke about earlier. And it's just the ego. But I do think, though, we were even having a conversation and I felt listened to when you were just taking those pauses, which is just crazy. So I can see how it actually works in a way that it feels considerate to the other person, as opposed to just firing right out there with something. So I can definitely see that for sure.
And for you as the leader, the host, the listener in this context, it does something really, really subtle and yet powerful for you as well. So all of us enter a conversation with our listening batteries, either a green or yellow or red, or maybe close to, shutting down and black, right? Just the act of silence just puts another couple of % back in your listening battery, but also in theirs. And it creates a kind of neurological reset for everybody, because we're in this fierce dialogue. We're not in this place of, let me use my system 2 thinking, which is not just reflection, but reflexivity. How am I thinking about this? This is a higher order processing, but this is where transformation happens. This is where step change happens. This is where breakthroughs in a sales process happen. This is where you move from beating the competition to helping the client navigate the business case through the organization. That's a very different selling orientation. When we move up to that level of thinking, that's created by space that's non-conventional. I had a client I was working with in New Zealand, and they were selling a CRM system into a client, and they'd beaten the competition, but they lost to toilet paper. The Kimberly Clark, the people who were selling them toilet paper, said, if you buy bulk, if you buy 12 months, we'll ship as you consume, but we'll give you a big discount. And they took part of the money that was allocated for this CRM project and moved it to toilet paper. Now, they didn't lose the sale, but it was delayed for nearly 12 months because they didn't realize that their job is to arm the client with a business case. It's not enough to beat the competition, and not enough sellers listen for who's approving the business case. They listen to how to beat the competition.
We're going to be replaying that quote, somewhere between 100 and 1,000 times over the next 5 years of training. That is a spectacular nugget for everybody to take away.
It is hard because it changes your mind frame, right? Like it completely changes your mind frame as you go in as a seller. So I'm going to help this person navigate through their buying process, as opposed to how do I beat my competition here? It actually allows you to bring value. So it is very interesting for sure. I'd like to hear more about that, actually.
Yeah, here's a really simple heuristic for you, David. Page 2 of your proposal. So the proposal's got a cover and it's got the client logo on it, not yours, right? That's what happens with your proposals. Your logo is not on the front page. The client's logo is on the front page. On the second page, now, for some people listening, they're going, huh? I don't have that client logo on the front page. Yeah, because you're trying to beat the competition with your logo. You're not thinking about it. your proposal should be standalone and be able to take in a finance or the approval committee, and they can read it in their context. Page 2 should be a one-page financial summary with an ROI on there that explains to the client in their internal process and language and culture why this is a good business case in their language, not in yours. It won't mention your product, it won't mention your features. It will talk about return on investment, a hurdle rate of return, whatever the client uses. It will have the client's value or strategic pillars. If the client talks about 3 or 5 values and they've got posters on the wall or it's on their annual report, that should be on page 2 of your proposal, because they go, wow, they're talking our language. I can actually share this internally. Everyone will get it. You should be talking about the 3 to 5 strategic pillars and which one of the pillars this aligns to. That should be on page 1. And then finally, you should not only be talking about the cost of acquisition, but you should be talking about the cost to maintain and how this project and its ROI sustains itself through that. A lot of people get the first bit right and then miss the second bit. If you get all that on page 2, you don't have to rely on that person who's in front of you to navigate the business case internally. The document does that for you. Now, David, as you went through and kind of did a really quick audit, what's your scores? You're scoring pretty well on page 2 right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that we're doing, I don't think we're doing that good enough, but to be honest with you, we could always get better at it. For sure. But I definitely, as you were talking, and I'm guilty of this 900 word processing speed that I'm working with here. Maybe it's a bit slower, Mark, I'm not sure, but I kept on thinking of all the jobs that we've lost over time. And, calling Mark up going, how do I get out of this? How can we turn this around? And all those other things. And I can tell you for sure on those ones, we were trying to beat the competition, I think, and not really getting out there with in their words like we could. So I think that's a really fascinating, Oscar. Now, is that part of what you're talking about? Is that covered in your new book that you have out right now? Some of those strategies that you're talking about?
It sounds like it might be book number 4, how to listen, the seller's edition, right?
I could give you lots of content. I'm sure Mark can as well too.
But I think it's going to end up in my book. Since this is a collective discussion, I'm taking all of this. It's going to end up in my book.
Yeah, and it just spend a moment with me, David. Right now on page 2, do you have the client's strategic pillars? Yes, no.
No.
Do you have the client's values? Yes, no. Okay. Do you have a clear ROI for the initial acquisition?
Not on page 2. Not on page 2. Mm-hmm.
And then the last bit is, do you have the cost to maintain set out and how that's a sustainable business case? Not on page 2 is my suspicion. Yeah. So think of page 2 as the one page that everyone can read, whether it's finance, engineering, compliance, risk management, legal. Everybody gets it. It's like, it makes sense. It makes sense. Mm-hmm. They have done our job. Where selling friction increases is where the client has to translate your proposal into their internal language, context, and culture. Do that work for them. Your lumpy pipeline will shrink. It will flow like a funnel. The velocity will be there. And the question that this moves the seller's orientation from let's beat the competition to let's actually walk in the client's shoes. And a lot of people talk about being buyers coaches, but the reality is that's just code for how do I beat the competition? They don't take the time to ask. So how frequently does this committee meet that makes this approval? How do they evaluate the proposal outside of finance? What other factors are involved? Does everybody have an equal weight in the decision-making process? And which proposals consistently have succeeded and what do they have in them? And which proposals have consistently failed and what don't they have in them? If you ask those questions, the client is more than happy to do that because you're explaining to them, I'm going to do the work so you don't have to spend your weekend or burn the midnight oil the night before putting together a summary of all the proposals. I'm going to do that work for you. I'm going to make it easy. Let me write it up for you in a way that you can share internally. That's listening on a completely different level.
It also makes everything about them and not you, which is the common sense revolution that needs to take place in sales today. We talk a lot about absolutes in the book. Not we, you, Oscar, speak about language and absolutes. I'll use that as an absolute. That is a common sense revolution that actually needs to take place in sales, where people have to forget about them and think about helping the client. Maybe, guys, a discussion point from this point forward, just to provide helpful tips. You know, Oscar, you speak about 5 levels of listening in the book. First, yourself, then content, context, what's unsaid, 900, 400, 125, and then meaning. And I think before we're done, we should talk about these amazing examples you've provided where certain things happen when someone was listened to, and certain things happened when someone wasn't listened to. They're actually shocking examples. But if we go back to the 5 levels of listening, I wonder if you can give us some coaching direction in each of those categories, starting with listening to yourself.
Yeah, listening to yourself is noticing your listening battery. Is it fully charged? Is it yellow? Is it orange? Where is it in that journey towards shutdown? The reason I say notice your listening battery is because listening when your listening battery is drained is a waste of time for you and for everybody else. So maybe just rescheduling the conversation, or saying to the other person, look, I've just come out of a difficult conversation. Can you just give me a couple of minutes? In those couple of minutes, I'll give you 3 things that you can do. Grab a glass of water and drink it. Take 3 deep breaths, fully, completely, all the way through. And if you can, so if you're on a video conference, for example, play some music, mute yourself, play some music, and just reset your mind. If you can't do any of those things, just walk around the outside of the room you're in, walk outside and get some sunlight on your face, do something physically to reset yourself, and then come back into the conversation. The fallacy of listening is that we start listening when we focus on the speaker. We start listening actually by focusing on ourselves. And in the book, Mark's touched on it, we talk about orchestras, and the orchestra will play the exact same piece of music night after night after night after night after night after night in the same venue with the same instrument. But because they're professionals, because they have self-respect and mutual respect for the performers and the audience, they will tune their instrument every single time before every single performance. Now, if a musician can do that and they're playing the identical music, you should do the same. You should have this ritual, whatever it is, drinking water, walking outside, playing music, to get ready to listen. Any questions there, David?
Well, I have lots of questions.
Well, it's more fun if we play together.
It is, yes, because I just think, I mean, I'm hearing you and I hear this whole thing, and, you know, I'm thinking about describing this to some of my sales team, and I could picture some of them saying, whoa, that's so much work. It's so much work to listen, right? And it's like all this, you know, and I'm also curious about, first of all, how many people even recognize that they can improve in this area. I mean, you said you have 20,000 or so in your network. I mean, I assume most of those people in your network must assume that they have can improve in listening, but I wonder, generally speaking, how many people think they can improve. I'm just sort of thinking about it from a company. Yeah.
It's like I was looking at a quote from a reviewer recently that said, like comedy and sex, we all think we're better at it. Listening's no different. And the statistics in our book, we ask people on a 5-point scale, how would you rate yourself as a listener? Well, below average, average, well above average, etc. 74.9% of people rated themselves either well above average or above average when it comes to listening. So 3/4 of people think they're either well above average or above average listeners. When we asked the speaker the same question, they said 12% of listeners are well above average or above average. So there's a 6 times differential in the speaker's experience. Now, David, let me share a dirty little secret of listening. If you listen, it's really lazy, because your job as a listener is not to make sense of what the speaker's saying. Your job as a listener is to help the speaker express what they mean, what they think, not just what they say the first time. People watch me facilitate and they go, oh, they come back afterwards, and I kind of, like a magician, I show them all the tricks up my sleeve. And halfway through, they go, you are so lazy. And the final tip is, when you do this well, when you listen this way, you have fewer meetings because you hear what they mean. And the meetings that you do have are actually shorter. So for those, I call them the skeptical Steves in the organization, or the skeptical Sams of the organization. This listening, it takes so much effort. Why would I bother? I'm really good at what I do. That's great, no problem. If you want fewer meetings and the ones that you do have are shorter, then you get ready to listen to yourself first, because you will change the way the speaker communicates, and they'll do it in a shorter and more meaningful way if you create a space where they listen. So are your sellers up for shorter meetings, David?
No, I think that we have lots of meetings, lots of assumptions, and those assumptions can get us into trouble. And I think that there's certainly an opportunity for us to have better meetings, for sure. I could see that. I mean, I could see myself on the scale of rating myself as a 1 almost, I mean, to be quite honest, and maybe I'm being a little bit too hard on myself, Oscar, but it's definitely an area that I think that if it's not about me, this podcast, obviously, but if I can improve.
Yes, it is.
Well, I mean, and Mark as well. Like I just see that areas as being a huge improvement in my life. Quite frankly, I think that's why I was so excited when I heard you were coming on with Mark today. I was like, wow, this is going to be fantastic, because I think that you could have a much better, deeper relationships with clients and with your people that you work with, and all sorts of really great benefits by getting behind this skill. And I in your book, and I'm excited to see it, your book, because I think it could be a good step forward for everybody in sales. I think it's so important, for sure.
I just want to tell a very simple story that brings the difference between listening to what they say and what they mean to life. Jennifer from Minnesota, not too far from where you folks are listening to this conversation, was a stay-at-home mum for a while. She used to be a primary school teacher, and one of her children, Christopher, came home from school and said, Mummy, I'm so excited. I learned maths today. I learned that 3 is half of 8. And Jennifer was distracted. She's like, he's in primary school. Maybe he wasn't sure what he said, or maybe I misheard what he said. And she said, could you say that again, honey? And he said, yes, Mummy, I learned that 3 is half of 8. And she thought, what the heck are they teaching kids at school today? And she went to the kitchen cupboard and she got out 8 M&Ms and she lined them up like little chocolate soldiers in 2 rows, 4 by 4, all facing each other. And she said, Christopher, honey, as she picked him up and put him on the kitchen bench, she said, honey, count how many chocolate soldiers in this row. And he went, 1, 2, 3, 4, Mummy. And how many on the other side? He said, they're facing each other, 4, Mummy. She said, see, honey, 4 is half of 8, not 3. And with that, Christopher, like Superman, he leaps off the bench. He goes to the corner cupboard. He gets a blank sheet of paper and he gets a Sharpie and he draws the figure 8 on a piece of paper for his mum, and he shows it to his mum. And then he folds it in half for his mum vertically. And then he tears it in half vertically for his mum, and he shows it to his mum, and his mum realized he is showing her 3 and 3. 3 is half of 8. Christopher was thinking in geometry and Jennifer was thinking in math. Now, while you're visualizing this, if I would have got Christopher to fold that piece of paper in half the other way, 0 is half of 8 also as you tear it in half. 0 is half of 8, 3 is half of 8, and 4 is half of 8. When you go and visit prospects, your mind is using a heuristic that says, they're wrong, they're wrong, they're wrong. 4 is half of 8. Everywhere I've been, 4 is half of 8. And you have not taken the time to understand what they actually mean. And when you listen for what it means to them, not what they say, but what it means to them, you will now operate in a world where 0 is half of 8, 3 is half of 8, 4 is half of 8. There are many, many, many possibilities that emerge when you listen to what they mean, not what they say the very first time. Now, just a little postscript. What you don't know about Christopher, he graduated college very early, earlier than his peer group. He is a world champion bug catcher.
Oh, wow.
So he catches bugs, but the kind of bugs he catches are computer software bugs. Now, if you were listening for similarity, you would have been visualizing somebody with a net and a butterfly and kind of catching bugs, right? But if you're listening for difference, maybe you were listening for people who are creating computer bugs. And he's one of the most sophisticated bug catchers in the globe. And Christopher is also what you would call neurodiverse. He's not neurotypical. Some people might call him autistic. And the tip that Christopher gave when I interviewed him and his mum, Jennifer, is not enough people take the time to have a conversation about how they're going to have the conversation. They jump straight into the what. If you have a conversation about how you're going to have the conversation shortens because people say what they mean, not what they say the first time. So have you had a 3 is half of 8 moment, Mark?
I think I may have only had 3 is half of 8 moments in most of my recent communication. How do we do that? You triggered some interest there, Oscar, having a conversation about having the conversation. So let's say I'm walking into my next one-on-one with a sales leader that I'm coaching, or my next executive team meeting that I'm facilitating. Tell us a little bit about that, having the conversation.
It's so simple. This is independent of whatever agenda is agreed for the meeting. Simply ask at the beginning of a conversation, ideally before you have the conversation, but in this context, you're walking in, Mark, you say to David, what will make this a great conversation today? And he would say,
Oh, I would say, hey, let's just get to the point or whatever, like that's, let's get through this, or let's make sure that we connect or anything like that, right?
Yeah. And what I would do with David is every 15 minutes, I would check and I would say, hey, David, at the beginning of the meeting, you said, hey, let's get to the point. How are we tracking with that? And David, in a third of the cases, well, 28% according to our research, but just round it up to a third, will say, thanks, Mark, I've got everything I need. Let's close the meeting there. Because we're checking in all the way through. In a 1 hour meeting, every 15 minutes. Now, I don't recommend 1 hour meetings. I recommend 50-minute meetings. And the reason I recommend 15-minute meetings is start 5 minutes after the hour. And this is a ritual that will allow the counterpart, your client, your prospect, your direct report, whoever, your supplier, to come to the meeting. And when I do this with clients, they go, oh, Oscar, I so look forward to your conversations because I can go to the restroom, I can get a glass of water, a cup of tea, but more importantly, I've processed the last conversation. I'm ready for this conversation. If all the world just moved to the meeting off the hour by 5 minutes and at the back end off the hour, it will happen. So this question, what will make it a great conversation for you, is designed as a how question. So we can use a process to check in, and it's a compass setting that says, David said, let's get to the point. So Mark, I infer from that time matters to this person. It's the currency they trade in. So I'm making sure that I'm probably checking in at the 10-minute mark, not at the 15-minute mark in this context, to go, How are we going? Are we on track? Now, it signals straight away that you listen to what they said at the beginning of the meeting. So there's a bit of political capital you just exchanged, that they went, well, he's listening to me, so I will listen to him. So check in all the way through is the critical part of this. Now, most people don't ask that question. And as a result, the conversation just meanders through an agenda. But we don't understand what really matters to David. What really matters to David? Time. How do we talk into time? Time is his currency. That's what we heard in that little interaction there. So what's going through your mind now, Mark?
Almost the same question, Oscar. It feels like I could, I feel very comfortable with that if I was doing a one-on-one with David, taking that approach. And I think it would be a wonderful start for both of us for the meeting to clear a little bit about what's in the past. Also make it, David, understand that my goal is to make the meeting productive for him. So it's about him.
And you, no. Here's a really crucial distinction. Do not make the meeting about them. The meeting is about the intersection of you and them. There is a third perspective that most people don't do. I could have said, the question is, Mark, you asked them this question. David, what would make this a good conversation for you? This is typically people add that there. And this is the difference between being a servant or in service. A servant will bow down in front of the other person and almost give away power.
That's never happening between me and David, just so you're very clear. Oscar, let's underline that and don't cut that part out of the podcast, Thomas.
We're in service of the outcome. This is an abstraction that is you and me and our purpose. This is a guiding principle for the conversation. Now, one of the things we know again from the research is that when we ask that question, again, only it's 24% of people will ask the question the other way. So Mark will say, I will make this a good conversation, David. David says, blah, blah, blah. 24% of people ask the opposite. In that case, your job, Mark, is to say, and this is what will make it a good conversation from my perspective, blah, 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 blah. So he knows where you're going, you know where you're going. Yeah, disclosure and transparency is critical here. We don't want to be doing a dance with our subconscious. Go, what's his real agenda? Yeah. That's not
Thursday, Mark, so we can practice this.
Yeah, we're going to do this Thursday.
You can.
Oscar, let's take it to that executive team example I used.
Yeah.
And you used a good one, I thought, in the book as well, where it was, the name escapes me, but it was a dysfunctional project team, and they were not working well together. And in fact, you asked them to write down an adjective about the project, and they were all shockingly negative.
Yeah.
And so but if you're walking, or David's walking into his next executive team meeting, the team is not working well together, not listening well, how would he kick off that meeting with a group to try and accomplish the same type of thing that you just discussed in the one-on-one?
Yeah. There is no reason you couldn't ask that question in exactly the same way in that group context. Given that situation, though, what I would ask in that context coming into the meeting is, I'd love to go around the room. What color would describe where your attention is at the beginning of our meeting today, and why? I'm red, I'm brown, I'm black. The color doesn't matter. It's the explanation. The intent of the question is to get everybody to notice where everybody else is. You have to make it quick. It's like one sentence, the color and one sentence. And all of a sudden you go around the room and you got a temperature check. So what you want to notice is, if I got lots of reds, the color doesn't matter, because red could imply energy. Yet in some meetings, red implies stop, halt, I'm not clear on the purpose of the meeting. I've had that when I use this technique. The other way I've done it, this is more with creative agencies and people who kind of not as buttoned down as I'm suspecting this context you're talking to, Mark, is if you were to describe yourself as soda or a soft drink or an alcoholic beverage, how would you describe yourself? Would you describe yourself as pop, or would you describe yourself as champagne, or would you describe yourself as a red wine? Or doesn't matter. What you want is the sentence afterwards. And you're not asking this question for you as the host. You're asking this question so the group can listen to each other. Good hosts get everybody to listen to the active speaker. Great hosts get everybody to listen to each other. Not enough hosts in group meetings realize that their purpose isn't to get everybody to pay attention to the content. If we pay attention to each other, we can draw out who hasn't spoken and what's not said in any conversation. Now, Mark, I'm conscious that a long time ago, we talked about the 5 levels of listening, but we did a really big detour and we only got to level 1. Maybe we come back at another time and do level 2, 3, 4, and 5 after you and David have practiced these techniques together.
Well, now I'll tell you what we've done well there. We've set anticipation for part 2 of this podcast, which will come again. And in the meantime, though, clearly, Oscar, folks are going to want to know, first of all, how to learn more about you. We're going to point them to How to Listen, Discover the Hidden Key to Better Communication by Oscar Trimboli. And that's going to be in the show notes. So they're going to get to the book that way. But how do they learn more about you?
So again, I don't want you to learn more about me. I want you to learn about your listening barriers. I would rather you spend that unit of your time visiting listeningquiz.com and taking the 7-minute quiz, getting the report that tells you what your primary listening barriers are and a couple of tips about what to do about it. So visit listeningquiz.com, learn about your listening barriers, and that will increase your self-awareness so that, as David mentioned earlier, once you're exposed to this information, you can never unlearn it. And you realize that listening is a skill that can be learned. It's a strategy and it's a practice. In the book, at the end of every chapter, we give you 3 questions to go away and play with. And my wish for you is that you access those 3 questions. And the book is designed to be read 1 chapter per week, not from start to finish, because we want you to go and practice in the workplace. Thanks for listening, Mark and David.
Well, Oscar, thank you so much for joining. What a pleasure speaking to you again today. And David, as always, it's great to have you as a teammate running these podcasts. Thank you for joining today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. And Oscar, thank you for the work that you're doing. And can't wait to dive into your book. I'm going to commit to reading it for sure. And I'm excited because I think that it could be actually life-changing for me personally and for the people around me. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening, David.
And folks, thank you for listening today. The intent of the Selling Well podcast is to provide some strategies, processes, tools, insights that you can apply to your business and your industry today. And we hope we've accomplished that today. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast. That really matters for us. But if there's ways that we can improve this and make it more effective for you, we do want to know. We're growth-oriented. We love constructive criticism. Please send that criticism or feedback to me, Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. No dot, Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. I check that email personally, and I'll really appreciate your feedback. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time on The Selling Well.